Awesome. Well, it's great to meet you. I just watched the movie, and when it comes to horror, I'm a bit of a snob. There are certain requirements I have for a good scary movie. I don't like the cheap scares or anything like that. And I can count on one hand the number of movies that have legitimately freaked me out or scared me in the last 20 years. And this one definitely got me. So it was intense. There were those elements that I wanted to predict where it was going, and then it did not go in the direction that I thought it was going to. Can you tell me, like, what was it you were really going for with this? Is there a particular type of feeling that you wanted to evoke with this film?
Uh, I mean, I'm always down for a good spiral out of control.
Yeah.
I think a worthy descent into madness or question, a desire for answers that brings you to a place that you may not want to go. I like the idea that asking certain questions may put you at peril, and that you might find yourself asking them anyway because you can't stand the idea of not knowing something or not looking deeper into something. And so I think I was really inspired by Ben Collins and Luke Petrowski's script. I thought it was complex. I thought it spoke to a lot of emotional gray areas. I thought it genuinely frightened me, and it left enough things for me unresolved. There was, I think, as there is in any project, the temptation to, overdevelop it or take it into a place that would allow it to boil down to a very specific point. But I really appreciated a lot of the contradictory notions about it. That there was, one of our teammates or editor called it a deconstruction, and that we would joke that the universe is most itself in a state of pure contradiction. That sometimes the goal of the movie is to just kind of demonstrate the battle or the dilemma, and not so much offer solutions. I thought that unresolved was becoming in the material.
And was the goal, when you're coming into this, were you thinking in any way this is a haunted house movie, or is this a haunted person movie, or was it kind of a blend of both of those things when you were trying to evoke, because the house is such a character in the story?
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's kind of both. I mean, they're one and the same in some regards. Like, the house is both a metaphor for the mind. In this case, it's also a metaphor for marriage. Owen, Beth's late husband, built the house in some ways as an idyllic solution to dilemmas that both he and her experienced at early times and earlier times in their marriage. And so the idea that this was a picturesque solution to certain emotional difficulties, and that could turn on its head, that you could find the inverse of that, or discover that a safe place that you had created was actually not so safe. All that made a lot of intuitive sense to me. So it seemed fitting that you could rely on the tropes of a haunt to get to some of these somewhat more interior places. You could explore anxiety and depression and grief by utilizing these tropes. And I would say it was haunted house was a big part of it, but also gothic romance was something that we were definitely going for.
And thinking of just recent films that struck me in a similar way as watching this, I think of the movie The Babadook, where you've got elements of supernatural, you've got things in there where it could be that there's this entity, but at the same time, as the viewer, you're questioning, is this all in the person's head? Is this actually happening? Or is this kind of a visualization of that trauma and grief? Is that a fair way to view this, do you think?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's all of the above. It's just how you compartmentalize reality in terms of the movie. In some ways, it's a movie about a person that's having nightmares and dreams, and then in some ways, the movie itself is the nightmare and the dream. where is the distinction necessarily? And so I do find that it's fun to kind of imagine where we might draw those lines for ourselves when we're watching something like this, and then break it. Not to be random, but just to say that I guess for me, thinking about central character and thinking about her state of mind, that just feels like the experience she's having. It's hard to put your finger on where exactly reality ends and the imagination begins. And that's a fun space. I think as a storyteller, you have to be careful, because if you go too far into the symbolic or the representational, it can get tedious or boring. So you want there to be a strong dramatic thrust. But that's a balance we were definitely trying to find.
And for a lot of this film, we only see one character on screen. For a lot of the story, it's the focus on Beth and what the ordeal is. And there's, I think for the first 9 or 10 minutes, there's virtually no dialogue. It's just kind of following and getting that feel. How challenging is that for you as a filmmaker compared to, I mean, from the acting side, it's obviously a challenge, but for you to really evoke everything you wanted to, how did you plan that out? How did you find that space?
Well, it helps to have a really incredible lead. I mean, Rebecca can do anything. And also, I think, creating a space for her to remain unpredictable, and for there to be a kind of restless energy on screen. I find behind the camera, I want to let the performance surprise me. I don't want to try to control it or compartmentalize it or overproduce it in any way necessarily. And so I think you have to be really, really fascinated with the character. And for me, I was really excited to do focused on one person journey. And then a lot of that was her alone dealing with manifestations, both of her own mind and external. It helps that she is just a really fascinating character, that she's confrontational and frank, incredibly honest, sometimes a little cruel. She's funny. And ultimately, she's extraordinarily vulnerable. And she's getting closer and closer to a very dangerous place. And as an audience, myself, kind of watching her, both as director and audience member to the film, I feel both with her in some moments, and then in other moments, I feel like she's gone farther than I'm capable of going. And she's in things that I can't describe in my own life. And there are times in the presence of others in the film, her friend or her neighbor, where I relate more to them, trying and failing to manage her in some ways. And so I think that perspective shift keeps things very interesting to me. It's not always traditional suspense. There's levels of dramatic irony in there as well.
Definitely, yeah. And I think that there's a couple of things about the film that really struck me, and you don't go down a lot of the traditional routes to get those scares, and it's nothing, you don't have like forced jump scares. You don't have those things that are repeated over and over. They're used effectively and in the right moments. From a special effects standpoint, there's some really cool camera work here where you're really getting that look in the house and trying to see things, and is it there, is it not there? How much of that was just camera work, and how much of that required some external special effects?
A lot of the sequences dealing with spaces and negative spaces and the architecture, creating interesting visual presentations, all that stuff was real. Like, you could walk through the house and see the things that you're seeing on screen. We did augment them digitally in some ways. Some of that's just the limitations of what we could do, but also we wanted to push it at times into something that would otherwise be impossible. But I'm really fascinated by changing spaces. I'm really fascinated, like, both in terms of the cinema, in terms of what you can photograph, but also as kind of a representation of the mind, a changing mind. I find that a visual environment like a house is an interesting simulacra for so many different things that you may think you understand. It's, in this case, it's the marriage. It's also Beth's deteriorating state of mind. And so to mess with that a little bit and, in some ways train the audience as to how the house works and fits together, and then to alter it, tease it, and change it is a bit mischievous, but a lot of fun from a filmmaking perspective. And at times we were perhaps too subtle. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that we did that went as far as like building rooms differently that I don't know if they go noticed, and you kind of have to have faith that on some subconscious level, the audience may detect that something's not right, but can't put their finger on it necessarily. It's hard to track how that's working necessarily. It's a bit of an act of faith from the filmmaker perspective.
It was interesting because I got to watch it on a digital screener versus seeing it on the big screen. I wish I'd seen it on the big screen to really get that group feel for it. But digitally, there were multiple times where I rewound it and went back a little bit to see, did I actually see what I thought I saw? And some of the elements of the rooms and things that were reversed and all of those, trying to kind of pick it apart. So while I hope people get to see it on the big screen, it's one of those really cool experiences to watch it at home and have that control to go back and forth and find those things. So it's little hidden moments I thought were very, very cool. The other big element of this movie that really struck me was the music and the use of sound. It's very foreboding in a lot of moments. There's some places where there's the lack of music, but the score itself, the music is just so great. How did that come about?
Ben Lovett is an old friend of mine. We met in college and we've worked together for 20 years. First short films and then anthology films. And then did the last feature that I made, The Ritual, and now this. And Ben and I just have a dialogue, and he's also a bit of a story therapist who comes in late in the game. And, when you're kind of immersed and losing perspective on what you're making a little bit, and he comes in and can sort of clarify. Rick Schnupp did the sound design, has just an astonishing ear. And one of the things that was great about both of those collaborators is that they not only know when to push it and hopefully can appreciate when I'm like, this is the place where you can really do something, but they're also the first to tell me, like, you don't need me here, and it's always interesting to spend the better part of a year with a film and then you get to the score and the sound design and you're just struggling to have perspective on what you're making necessarily. Everybody is really. And so it's a very intuitive process, like what you'll play up and what you don't, what you indicate and what you don't. I think we wanted to really have fun with the material and push it at times, but the silence can be truly disarming when used well. So we had a blast creating it. I think it helps too that it's a single journey of one protagonist, because you really can anchor it to that perspective.
And it's very noticeable through the film as I'm watching it, and there's so many shots of Rebecca's face and just the different emotions as they're going across her, whether it's the scene where the bar scene early on where she's struggling to deal with everything that's happening, the parent that comes in and is talking about those experiences. And there's little moments throughout where you see all of these changes just right on her face without her saying a word. How much of that was her just bringing it and just rocking the role versus what was on the page? Like, how much of an evolution was there from the script to what we see in the finished film?
I mean, well, first of all, if you roll camera on Rebecca, it's always going to be faster. She's always going to drop into something. I think she understood on a very intuitive level something about the script. And that's a lot of what's carried in the film, is her experience with the material. I try as a director to, bring my own perspective to it, but also to make room for the actors when I can. And it's ultimately their emotions. It's their instincts on screen. And the hope is that there's something spontaneous there, that it still has the potential to surprise me. And that I'm not just guiding someone to a really specific take on what's happening. And so the process with this was a little bit run and gun. It's an indie. We didn't have a ton of time. And it took a lot of trust and and I think at times a desire to pull back the filmmaking apparatus and just make room for an experience. And there's takes in the movie where I had no idea what Rebecca was going to do. I'm not positive Rebecca knew what Rebecca was going to do. Just kind of wind the moment up and say, let's see where it goes, shoot the rehearsal kind of mentality. And something happens when you do that. I find that it can feel a little different. You can't always do it, but when you can, there's a certain magic that can occur. But yeah, it's difficult to say, where the script ends and where the actor's interpretation begins. And at the end of the day, what my place is in that. I would just say at the end of the day, it's a collaboration. We're all responding to one another in the material as best we can.
And after you read the script and you were thinking about how you wanted this to look, were there any other films or any books or anything that influenced what you were going to do with this? Any kind of inspiration from other movies?
Yeah, I mean, there were some films I looked at how they were shot. I mean, I really thought there was something to Personal Shopper, to the way that the way the camera sort of worked with and negotiated Kristen Stewart's performance. I really liked the energy of that. Well, a lot of inspiration though came from there's a book that House of Leaves.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. I mean, I think that book was something that was a topic of conversation for us years before I ever read the script. I'm not sure if they had written it before they read it or not, but we had talked a lot about geography horror and changing spaces and how it seems underserved and how fun that would be in a movie. And I like, again, the idea of something that is not afraid to confuse to an emotion, that frustration can at times be part of the experience of something, if that's the journey of the character. And so I think the spirit of that probably found its way in the movie somehow. We certainly drew some inspiration from it.
House of Leaves was what I was going to mention right at the beginning of this interview, because that was the first thing that came to mind when I was watching it with the house. Anytime I see a house, I'm thinking, oh, okay, I hope this is House of Leaves. I hope somebody found a way to turn that into a film. And this is, I mean, that's for lack of, hopefully somebody figures it out. I think that's probably an unfilmable novel just because of how complex it is. This is the closest that I could think of. So anybody that I know that loves House of Leaves, I'm going to tell them that they got to see this, because it does that geography of the space and the reversal and all of that element. So yes, I'm glad you said that. So my other question is, this has been a crazy year for everybody. Everything's been nuts in the world with everything like that. And now this is finally coming out. Everybody's going to get a chance to see that. Over the last year or so, has there been any other projects or anything that you've been working on that you think is going to be coming next? Like what's the next film for you?
I'm very fortunate to be developing a Hellraiser movie with Spyglass. And, Barker's formative to me. Hellraiser's a film that I saw at a very young age, didn't quite understand it, terrified me. Saw it a few years later, understood it much differently. And then I think every time you venture into that world, you come back with something a little different. I think hits you, Hellraiser. And so I think it's a fascinating, incredibly delectable, complex world that, as a fan of the genre, I am just excited that there's a willingness to open the box again. And so getting to be a part of that has been nothing short of like a dream come true. So we'll see.
Is that going to be something that you want to hew closer to the original, or do you want to take some of the things that you did with this film, some of those more subtle and the use of the negative space and all of that kind of stuff? Is that something that you want to try and use in either Hellraiser or in another project in the future?
There's no telling sort of, I mean, I would say it's like maybe best to not be too conscious of where you show up in the material. It'll happen whether you want it to or not, but I would never try to remake the original Hellraiser. I just don't think that can be done. It would be blasphemous to do so. But I do think that there are other stories that can be told in that universe. And, we'll respond to the material as best we can, but we'll see where it carries us.
And is yours going to be in the same continuity, or are you looking at this as a reboot, a standalone, or would it fall within the already established stories that have been told?
I think
maybe an unfair question.
Yeah. Maybe at a later time, I think I could divulge a bit more at this point.
Okay.
It's still very early days. Yeah.
Well, I didn't have a doubt that this was going to be good. I mean, the trailers make it look a certain way, as all trailers do. And I'm very glad that it upended my expectations, and it was much more of it's a psychological horror movie. It is not an in-your-face, bloody, violent horror movie, but I think that's what makes it all the more frightening and the scarier. So I really do appreciate this film. I hope everybody gets to enjoy it as well. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. I appreciate it.
Do you guys believe in ghosts? I think there's something in my house. My husband took the boat out on the lake. He took a handgun that I didn't even know that we owned, and...
Did he leave a note?
he did. You were right. There is nothing. Nothing is after you. You're safe now.
You said you were safe? Safe from what?
And then over here we have, the husband. You know that we're paying people to do that, right? You don't have to do it all yourself. Owen? I didn't think we had secrets.
Everybody has secrets.
It's our house. But backwards. What the hell was he doing?
You were right. You were right. There's nothing.
There is nothing. You're safe now.